Good afternoon. I will now call the March 17th, 2026 Ben Lapine Schools Budget Committee meeting to order. I would like to introduce our participants this evening. Budget Committee Vice Chair Natasha McFarland, Nedlitz, Sharon Beluski, Apollo Aguirre, Tom Barman, Bryce Johnson, Chief Financial Officer Dan Emerson, Assistant Director of Finance Budget Nick Sheen, Board Chair Marcus Legrand, Board Vice Chair Amy Tatum, Director Cameron Fisher, Director Keena Chadwick, Director Jen Lynch, Director Ross Tomlin, Director Shirley Olson, Superintendent Dr. Steve Cook, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Lisa Burke, Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski, and I am Kara Marsh Rhodes, Chair of the Budget Committee. Moving on to review of the agenda. Dr. Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda, but I want to apologize because member of our financial team did not get the note to wear polka dots on his blue shirt, and we will direct that accordingly.
That is a nice match. Fellow committee members, are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing no requests for changes, we will proceed with the agenda as noticed. At this time, I will entertain a motion for the 2026-27 Budget Committee Chair.
I'd like to nominate Apollo Aguirre to my left as Budget Committee Chair.
Thank you. We have a second. Natasha McFarland has made the motion, and Tom Barman has seconded the motion. I will now call for a vote. Aye. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, with a unanimous vote, with one abstention, Apollo Aguirre is the 2026-27 Budget Committee Chair. Yay.
Need to get him a blue shirt.
With polka dots.
Thank you. At this time, I will entertain a motion for the 2026-27 Budget Committee Vice Chair. I move to nominate Natasha McFarland as Vice Chair.
At the point, make sure you turn your microphones on when you're speaking so that we can hear.
Red. Is red not on? Oh, green is on. That was
Leave
fine.
them all on.
Yeah. I move that we nominate Natasha McFarland as Vice Chair.
I second.
We have a second. Thank you. Sorry.
Tom Barman.
Tom Barman has made the motion and Shirley Olson has seconded that motion. I will now call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
One abstention. With one abstention.
One extension.
And then name the person who's the vice chair now.
We vote of with vote of
Just said unanimous. Unanimous.
unanimous
Yeah. And then
with
take-
one extension. I apologize. First time.
It's all good. Hey,
This is my
we've all had to do this.
Natasha McFarland is the 2026-2027 Budget Committee Vice Chair. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the public comment section of the agenda, we did not have anybody sign up to provide public comment. Yes? Thank you. Moving on to the public comment section of the agenda. Apologize again. At this time, we will hear from Dan Emerson, Chief Financial Officer, with the proposed 2026-2027 budget document.
And I'm actually going to defer the opening to our Superintendent and Budget Officer, Dr. Cook.
Thank you, Apollo. Thank you, Dan. Dear members of the Budget Committee, Ben Lapine School staff, students, families, and community members. As we enter the 26-27 budget development process, Ben Lapine Schools does so in a period of increasingly tight financial conditions. Slower state revenue growth, increased fixed costs, growing state mandates, and continued uncertainty in the Oregon state budget requires us to be especially disciplined, transparent, and strategic in how we allocate public resources. These realities demand careful choices, but they do not diminish our commitments to ensuring that every student in Ben Lapine Schools thrives in our classrooms and graduates prepared for college, career, and life. Stewardship of taxpayer dollars remains a core responsibility of our district. Whether we're investing in staffing, instructional materials, student supports, or the maintenance and updating of our facilities, we approach budget decisions with intentionality, with stakeholder engagement through our budget committee process, and a clear focus on impact. In a constrained fiscal environment, it is more important than ever that our investments are aligned with what matters most for students and produce measurable improvements in learning outcomes. Our budget continues to be guided by the belief that each Ben Lapine School student is known by name, strength, and need, and that students, staff, and families experience schools where they can thrive. The district's organizational goals remain our true north. Students develop a strong academic foundation. They have a passion, purpose, and a plan for their future. And students, families, and staff experience wellness, inclusion, and belonging, and operational systems aligned to support an academically effective and financially sustainable organization. Within these priorities, we are continuing to refine and strengthen core instructional and operational systems that directly influence student success. This includes ongoing work to align our instruction and improving grading practices so they more accurately reflect student learning, deepening the implementation of research-based reading instruction, expanding equitable access to career and technical education pathways, and ensuring that systems across the district establish common expectations across each of our schools. Even in a tighter budget climate, these efforts remain central to improving outcomes for our students. We are continuing the work of the District Culture and Climate Task Force for another year with intentional focus on refinement, coherence, and support. Building on the foundation established in prior years, this phase of the work emphasizes ensuring that all staff clearly understand the purpose, the expectations, and the practical applications of agreed-upon Tier 1 practices, and that they feel adequately supported in delivering this work in their classrooms and schools. Through collaboration among educators, support staff, and administrators, we are strengthening consistency across the district. Also, shared ownership classroom practices that promote positive learning environments, student dignity, and a strong sense of belonging. As a part of Oregon's integrated planning process, we continue to evaluate how best to allocate student investment account funds to support all of our students and ensure they are prepared for their future. This work is informed by a wide range of stakeholder feedback, including staff advisory groups, the Student Voice Council, the District Equity Coalition, family and community partners, and school-based input. These perspectives help guide decisions about where targeted investments can have the greatest impact while ensuring that these limited resources are used strategically, equitably, and in alignment with our organizational goals. Finally, I would like to confirm that this proposed budget adheres to the requirements outlined in Ben Lapine Schools Executive Limitation 4.3 Financial Planning and Administration, including maintaining an ending fund balance of at least 5% of general fund resources. We are grateful for the continued partnership and support of our community as we navigate these fiscal challenges together, always keeping student success at the center of our work.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. And now for the start of the proposed budget presentation, I'm going to pass it to our Budget Director, Nick Shane.
Okay, we've got our agenda. Before we get started, we just wanted to thank all of you very much for your time both this evening and at the budget workshop a couple weeks ago. We know that you all are here in a volunteer capacity and that you're serving our students and our communities, and it's something that we appreciate very much. So just wanted to give you a hearty thank you before we jump into our quick presentation. As far as kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about here, we'll go over the proposed budget. I'll talk about the revenues, then Dan will talk about kind of our expenditures. and then we'll get into kind of some changes about how we got to this point in our budget process, and then we'll look at future year's outlook and also talk about some potential solutions that are available to us in the long term. So really, the single biggest revenue that we have is the state school fund, and that provides the majority kind of our operational revenue. And the way that it's calculated is that the state has their appropriation, and then they add to it all of the local property taxes that are collected throughout the state that are kind of earmarked towards education. And that they take that one big pot, and then they divide it all up based on student enrollment, and then they apply or allocate all of that whole big pot of dollars out to school districts based on kind of the student enrollment. And so really what matters for us in terms of our finance is what our percentage of enrollment is compared to that throughout the state. So for this year, we're looking at about 2.9% in terms of kind of our percentage of enrollment compared to the state, which translate to the same percentage in terms of state school fund dollars as well. And then also, with this being the second year of the biennial budget, the state kind of allocates their portion over the 2 years, and in this biennium, it was 49% to the first year, 51% to the second year. So kind of the way that all works out, it works out to be about a 4% increase in state school fund dollars, in general, and then also our percentage of that is also about a 4% increase. And so for this proposed budget, our state school fund revenue is $236.6 million, and then 122.3 of that comes from local revenue, and 114.3 of that comes from the state. Outside of the state school fund, our next largest revenue source is the Student Investment Account Grant. So this is a state grant. It's relatively new, I think about 4 years. So this is the 4th year of the SIA. And this upcoming year, our proposed budget includes an estimate of $16.7 million for that grant, which is about a 4% increase from the prior year. Kind of one of the things that we talked about in our workshop a couple weeks ago is revenue increases versus cost increases. A 4% increase in the SIA grant isn't really sufficient to cover all of our staffing. So we have moved some FTE out of the SIA grant and moved it into the general fund and other grants. And our next largest revenue source is also another state grant, and that's the High School Success Grant. If you remember Measure 98, and that was, I think, probably 7 years ago. So that's been with us for a little while. Our proposed budget in the SIA, or the High School Success Grant, is $5.2 million for next year. And that's about a 3.7% increase. And again, with modest increases in the revenue, we're not able to fully cover staffing costs in that grant. So we've got personnel that are an FTE that are moving out of the High School Success Grant and being absorbed by the general fund. Our final kind of significant revenue source comes to us in the form of federal funds. And of those, our two biggest are Title I and IDEA. So both grants that do a lot of really great things for our students. But the big picture is that our federal programs are kind of either flat or trending downward. So in terms of title, we're estimating revenue of about $2.8 million for next year, which is about a $200,000 reduction from the prior year. In IDEA, we're looking at about $2.2 million, which is gonna be roughly 400,000 from the prior year. So again, both big grants that offer quite a bit of funding to us, but not on the level that it has been in the past. And again, we're trying to manage our staffing with the dollars that we have and looking to put staff elsewhere because of what the revenue looks like.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. I'll go over some of the expenditures in the long-term forecast. So let's move forward here. Personnel expenditures, they make up 85% of the general fund operational budget, whether it's certified or classified staff or admin. I mean, people cost is the main part of our business here. And so oftentimes that's what we're looking at when we're looking at reductions and things of that nature, because 85% of our business is personnel. School personnel is based off staffing ratios. I believe the average teacher to student ratio is about 26, but it differs depending on if you're in kindergarten or first grade or if you're in middle school or high school. Operational personnel has historically been held flat or reduced, and so by operational personnel, we mean personnel outside the schools, whether it's HR, finance, IT, custodial, maintenance, et cetera. The fiscal year 26-27 general fund operation budget includes $195.1 million in personnel appropriations. That is a 0.01% increase from the revised $194.8 million in FY 25-26 budget. We did have to balance this budget and to make sure that we're financially viable in future years. We had to cut $5.3 million or 2.7% from the requested to proposed budget and personnel to ensure services are, that there's not that we can balance the budget, frankly, and that we can afford to pay staff in future years. So that personnel cut represents 75% of the total cuts. The other 25% will be in operational expenditures, materials and services. We are still modeling and evaluating the final personnel decisions and the staffing plans related to how we're going to absorb all 5.3 million in those cuts. But we are very hopeful that we will be able to do the vast majority of that through attrition. Although I think we spoke about it at the last meeting, we are not as hopeful as we have been in the prior 2 to 3 years that we will be able to get all of it through attrition. We're just getting to an operational level where that's very difficult. And if you've been absorbing those kind of losses for a few years, that makes sense. So are there any questions on this slide before I move forward?
I understand you're still kind of working all of that out. When do you think you'll have a better idea of percentage attrition and percentage potential actual cuts?
I think attrition.
Yeah, so there's some like statute type of language that tells us that like staff need to let us know by X date. So April 15th is the date when our practice is that all staff need to let us know if they're coming back from a leave or if they're going on a leave. That's not like, there are oftentimes still changes that occur after that, but that is our practice that we use to sort of make sure that we kind of know where our staff are headed, and then we can make moves internally to land some of these pieces.
Okay.
So it will be late April is the moral of the story.
And then that will come down to the real categories where actual assessing where to trim would be after you have a sense of that, late April. Then by May, we would have a good sense of what areas actually cutting.
I want to also take it, what Lisa was talking about, just a little further in that this will start with any positions that we can liquidate that would have a budget impact is where we start. And so removing positions that currently are unfilled allow us the most flexibility. Then the second step would be we're going to then involuntarily transfer. We would likely have to do that just like we've done every single year. When you are in a reduction mode, you start shuffling people around that have a guarantee or a promise of a job. And if we can solve our issue with those two options, then we don't have to implement some type of riffing process. And those two things you need to know before you can determine whether or not you're going to have to actually reduce positions that hold people currently in them. And when you have to do that and there isn't a position to move them to, then we have to go through our RIF processes much in the way that we've bargained and negotiated with both our certified and classified units. And so the answer of how that can be is still too early because we don't know who's in every role. And so those things play out over time. And part of what you have in front of you is an obligation from our team to do that in the most
Efficient.
benign way, right? Like honest, like yeah, with the least amount of harm, I think is the right term, is just this idea of wherever we can make solutions happen in which we aren't in a role of pulling people's jobs away from them is where we aspire to go. And I want to remind everybody that 7 years ago, 7 years ago, we were at 18,600 students, and now we're in the 16,400 student range. So that's a reality of the world that we're in. And so I just want to reiterate how important it is that we do this thoughtfully and in accordance with those agreements.
Yeah, the timeline helps me a little bit. Thanks.
You mentioned that there's another 25, I think, % or so that would be operational. Where are you thinking of cutting operationally?
That's in the next slide.
Oh, could I ask a question about attrition? So
Sure.
that's a very employee, staff-centered look at how to make cuts. I understand that. But how do you make sure that the outcomes are student-centered so that you're not losing skills that you need for your objectives? And then at any point, is there a sense that we might need to be more strategic in cuts rather than using attrition? Like, is there a point at which, or is there a time at which we need to look more strategically at cuts rather than through attrition in order to make sure that we have our student success outcomes that we want?
Yes. I'll just say yes. Does that answer the question? So there are several factors that go into this. One of them that really puts students at the center of this is related to forecasting. So for our secondary students in grades 6 through 12, they are all actively telling us, these are the courses that I'm most interested in. These are the courses that I would like to take in order to graduate. Obviously, there are things that we need to offer because students need to get the credits to graduate. But as we start to have other things that are more elective types of options that are either created or go away year to year, when we start to look at what students are most gravitating toward, then that is a point at which we start to consider, okay, maybe there's a shave there that looks different than making a different type of choice. That's only one aspect of this. Sometimes when we have staff that are, leaving us or going on leaves, those are other factors that we can put into the equation. But from a student-centered standpoint, we know that we have courses that we must give. And so that is something that we do, number one. And then we tend to lean toward the ear of students to say, okay, what are the other things that are really causing you to be very passionate, finding your purpose, executing a plan, all of those things that are part of the promise of the board. To the second part of your question, we absolutely will need to become more strategic. And what I mean by that is not that now we aren't strategic and later we'll become strategic, but what I mean is that we will need to probably reinvent and collapse things that we have been doing that have just been the way that we've done things forever, and really reevaluate, does this match where we're headed? Things that go the extreme distance on that include talking with our community around things like looking at consolidation of buildings, looking at ballot types of things. So that's like an extreme measure that is more levy is the word. But that's one mechanism that's kind of over here. And all of those are within our future landscape for sure. We haven't like made decisions on the time at which we would say, okay, now we're there. But we are definitely in consideration of all of those things right now.
And I think Dr. Book did an absolutely wonderful job of talking a little bit about the weeds of TLC, the teaching and learning kind of line, but I would just anchor it back a little bit on the budget process too. In the requested budget, we meet with every single department, and then of course we see how much the needs are for that year, and we come up with an ending funding balance. And of course this year that ending funding balance wasn't enough to hit our reserve requirement or enough to hit our operational needs in future years. And so before we go and say, okay, well, it's time to increase staffing ratios and have impacts on the classroom, the first thing we evaluate is we go back to the operational departments and we say, what can you cut? And we've asked operational departments this year, what can you cut in personnel? We've had that conversation, I think, about other groups of classifications besides teachers as well. So the first thing we always do is try to protect the classroom around, and then we make the operational cuts in materials and services, the operational cuts in personnel, and then at the very end, you know, you're left with whatever you have to balance. And I think that's when you start having to have some of the more serious conversations about where in the classroom can we balance.
I want to add one piece to that before I think we're going to keep talking about this, but there are some qualifiers. There are some significant qualifiers. We do not have the freedom to spend every dollar as we see fit. We have restricted funds that are required to be spent in particular ways, and it's very challenging to be strategic with funds that are directed to be utilized in certain fashions, whether we're talking about early literacy or we're talking about title funds or one of our largest, I think it might be the largest federal fund source we have, which is the Nutrition Services Fund. We are given what we're given, and those have to be used in those fashions. And so you can't really talk about strategic implementation of those dollars, just much like we presented earlier when Nick was talking about how we're using SIA dollars and high school success dollars. When those don't increase at the rate of the cost of personnel, you have to still find a way to deliver on those dollars. High school success was about increasing graduation and giving students pathways, and student success SIA dollars are about making sure you're providing for the neediest of students in your system, and how are you reaching those goals for those students, and you don't have the freedom around those to be as strategic. So that's important consideration.
Dan, I have go ahead.
Oh,
Tom.
Thank you. What enrollment, current year, next year, what's the decline?
I'm really hesitant to say that off the top of my head, but I think it's over 200-ish in around that
And
range.
so if you just use that times your staffing ratios, that gets you to enough cuts?
No, so I should specify this. So these are true reductions over and above what we would kind of term our staffing ratio reductions. So there's natural reductions given the fact that our enrollment has gone down year over year for the last 6-7 years. And so that's all part of the requested budget, which is the first level of the budget that we go. We look at the staffing ratios, and so there's natural reductions in that, and that's probably about 9 or so teachers. Most of that was felt in the elementary level this year because middle school and high school are still about the same, but the new kindergarten classes coming in are smaller. And so that's the requested budget. We put in the requested staffing plan, and then again, we look to see if we can balance. And at that point in time, we couldn't balance. So this $5.3 million is in addition to the natural reduction that we have due to declining enrollment. And that's where I was saying, you know, the first place we try to take it off to the top is operations, whether it's training, professional development, watering our landscape out here, iPads, leasing, all those types of things. We look at that backwards and forwards, meet with each director until it's bare bones and there's nothing left there. And then it's on to operational personnel and so forth.
So then we are cutting into and hitting the edges of the staffing ratios, or we're looking programmatically at other programs that aren't in those core classes that don't affect staffing ratios?
Both.
Okay. And so you put together numbers yet in terms of what the impact of that staffing ratio would be, or those are still numbers that you're working on?
I think that's what I think I'm indicating here, is that we're still working on what those numbers will be. We have some projective, but there's different kind of personnel models. And I do think before we could say for sure this is what the staffing impact is, although we have those models drafted, we should probably wait to see that April 15th date, what ends up being attrition, what ends up being an actual reduction.
Got it, thanks.
Dan, would you please remind us, last year, we made some significant cuts. And then as you talk about the process in terms of going to each department and saying, you know, what can you decrease in terms of expenditures? Can you remind us how much we did, how much we made, how much we lost? I don't know how to say it, from last year for this school year.
Yeah, off the top of my head, so some grace here, it would be over $1 million in operational, substantially more than I think we were able to do this year, but part of that was because we were able to change the model, as you remember, from iPads instead of purchasing to leasing. You know, I don't know if Paul Dean did a presentation, but we certainly cut down on watering, our fields went brown over, and there were some other things as well, maintenance, deferred maintenance. And so already going into this budget cycle, most of our operational teams were extremely tight in terms of what they could cut. Again, that wasn't personnel. And they were able to cut, you know, almost $1 million again. But again, we've cut some core software. We've got some deferred maintenance again, and pushing it out even farther, which is, you know, there's risk associated with that as well. But and then we had, on top of that, we had attrition absorption, roughly about 21 FTE, or approximately 3-point-some-odd million, and we were able to do that fully by attrition.
Thank you.
Can we, just since maybe we need to, I'd be interested in backing up a little bit, because you did say that this general fund is now absorbing costs that were attributed in prior school years to the SIA funds and HSS funds. Why would we not just cut to our budget there? Like, why would we reallocate those expenses into general fund when general fund is already constrained?
I think from a financial perspective, the SIA grant has some wide flexibility, so we've used it a little bit different than like a very constrained special revenue, where maybe you'd say this is a temporary position, and when the grant dollars go away, we would cut that position. I think there's positions in SIA that are, when you talk about impact to classroom and things like that, that are equally as important, so we moved those into the general fund. That would be, from my finance perspective, what I'd say is it's much more broad than like a federal grant. And then I'd let Lisa or Dr. Burke speak to some more of that.
Yeah, I think an additional component of that is that initially when we used those funds, we chose to use that for some really change to like fundamentally the way in which we staff our schools. So things like counselors are things that then became part of the fabric of Ben Lapine, which is also a state-regulated piece to have a comprehensive counseling program. So those are the dollars that we utilize to do that. Additionally, we fund several special education staff out of that because of this flexibility that Dan is talking about. So over time, we've been able to fund fewer, but they're such like who we are as a system right now that we don't just budget and stop right there.
And it goes,
It kind of goes back to this next, to where we are here, right? So now we've asked this general fund to absorb staffing that used to be in these other two funds. So in addition to it already being constrained by growing personnel costs. And I think the question about the, class size was actually a really good one, that we do have a number of these people who are part of our fabric who are not classroom teachers. That's fair to say. So could you talk a little bit about the thinking as you're making reductions? Is there a strategy to try and hold class size constant or bring it down? Because we do have a lot of people who are highly qualified certified teachers who are not impacting our class sizes today.
Yeah, so one of our strategies also has been an increase in class size. So our original, like 4 years ago, our original class size ratios were lower than they are today. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the question that you had, Tom, which is that there's the ratio sort of coming back to size, but then there's the increase of ratio, and that is one mechanism that we've utilized to cut down on some staffing. As distasteful as that is, some of those staff that are also in these positions that are not allocated at the classroom level, they also provide some critical services that allow the classroom teacher to be able to do their work. So things that we have seen and that we've been really trying to react and support and plan for over the past 3 years have been related to behavioral needs within the classroom, right? And so by having supportive services increase, we've also been able to support some of those students with some of the biggest behaviors within our classrooms. So they are outside of the classroom, that is true. And they are impacting directly the functioning of the classroom, which is also true. And neither of those are sort of better or worse than the other. They function in tandem to do the work for students.
If I may offer a thought on this topic, having served on this budget committee for 19 years, and Tiger Tualatin for 5 or 6 years before that, I've seen some of these downturns. And what I would love to encourage the board to do is to think very strategically through these processes. And we as the budget committee are here to follow your policy direction and your vision for this school. And it's really hard to talk about changing those classroom ratios because that's a really easy thing for people to point at and say you're doing what to our classrooms. But programmatically, when you create a program and you create a vision and you support those programs, to find the right people for those programs and to get programs, it takes years and years to have the kinds of amazing support programs we have going on. And it's really easy to start trying to spread the cuts everywhere. But when it comes to building it back, hopefully we get to a point where we can build back. It's a lot easier to build back classroom ratios in a classroom than it is to build back programs. And so to the extent that the board has very clear strategic goals, like this is important to us, that's the place you don't make cuts. And we make cuts in other places like classroom ratios. And when you put that on the front page of the paper, like you're gonna get a lot of criticism for allowing those ratios, but ultimately from a strategic direction, programs that you guys have invested in that are core to who we are as a community are where we have to make those investments.
And
That's
Tom,
my
I'd like-
personal perspective.
And Tom, I'd like to thank you for being a new PR person for that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I want to circle back to the moving to, I guess, and maybe I missed this, potential drawbacks of moving that FTE to the general fund. And I think, Jen, you were alluding to this a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about what those might be?
The positions?
Just say more, yeah, about the HSS that's moving into the general fund.
Nick, do you know off the top of your head the 2 or 3 positions?
I don't.
Okay. It really it's less position-based and more cost-based. And the reason that I say that is because it's not like we are actively reducing the number of people in that, but the cost of the people who are in that increases such that the budget that we have for it has to get absorbed elsewhere. So then they would be picked up through the general fund. So it's not like this person alone as a standalone walks away from this. It's like we are supporting these staff in our schools, and some of that is funded by SAA and others are not. Other portions are not.
So that makes sense. I guess I'm just wondering, so is there any concern of doing that?
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
can you help me understand those concerns aside from what has already been mentioned? I mean, I understand the reasoning behind it. I'm just trying to, just because I don't know anything about this.
Let me take a run at this. I think I've got, the easiest way to think about this is school districts really try hard to spend restricted dollars first. because restricted dollars have to be spent in this box and this box alone. And there's levels of restriction. SIA and high school success are a little out from restriction. So you have rules, but you have more flexible rules. And so what you want to do is have the most flexible dollars be the most places that you can be fluid with. And so we do a lot of maneuvering when, for example, increase finances, I think our SIA went up a smidgen, very small amount, but personnel costs went up 9%. And if we built our budgets for the previous year so that balanced, something's got to move. And so we pull a position out, we pull 2 positions out so that we can balance our SIA, which goes into the state for an integrated plan. We have to submit a plan to the state so that, and remember, SIA and high school success together are less than 10% of our overall budget. It's about 9%. And so we have to be maneuverable in those dollars. So this is a strategy. There might even be years where we're flush in cash, where we're not making cuts, where we still might strategically do some of these maneuvers. And so I don't want to necessarily make you walk away going, wow, they're reducing that, because we aren't always doing that. Sometimes we are reallocating. This year, we are reducing. And that is because the expenditures and cost of personnel is growing at a 9% rate when the revenue source is growing at 3.5 or 4.
And I would just kind of tag along there that a lot of what's in high school success is our high school teachers, our CTE teachers. They are classroom teachers. Some of them are classroom support like counselors. But then SIA is going to be counselors. A lot of SPED EAs, for high acuity students. So what we did do when we kind of got to the classroom is we did have a meeting with, Dr. Burke and the TLC executive level leaders to kind of talk about, as we get to this 5.3 and the portion of that is coming out of TLC potentially, what are some of those priorities? And what I can say is that, none of those positions were identified when you talk about CTE teachers at this point in time as being something that you would pull from Ben Lapine schools.
Great. Thank you, that helps a lot.
So we're still on this personnel is including both our instruction and support services requirements, is that correct? Yes. So to me, the proposed budget, it reads that instruction spending is going down while support services is going up in this proposed budget. So what's driving that? Is that more FTEs? Is it more spending per FTE? Could you say more about why that happened?
Sorry, Director Lynch, in what sense instructional is going down? Are you talking about by the function in the proposed budget, the PBAM function?
The thousands versus the 2000s.
Okay, I'm going to ask Nick if you could remind us what's in the support services function versus the instructional function, that would be great.
While he's looking that up, I can tell you on a high level, one of the things that we're seeing is we are seeing a decrease in enrollment while we are also seeing an increase of needs of students. And just on the grandest of scale, when that happens, we're making cuts in staffing positions while we're also adding positions in areas of need. And for us, those 2 largest areas where we're making those increases are in ELL and in special education. So I don't know that that's captured necessarily in the difference between 1,000s and 2,000s, but that is certainly an experience that we're having right now. When we are talking about how we're going to staff and we're meeting with our executive leadership teams, we are telling people we've got to reduce overall staffing here, but these departments are going to have to add staffing. And whatever that addition has to be absorbed in that difference to try to be able to make the balanced budget.
Yeah, and I think the 2,000 level support services includes a lot of really key services. So that's all of our counseling, our school psychs, speech paths, occupational therapists. It's all kinds of really student-focused things. It just doesn't happen to be in the actual instruction function. So we've got some additions in a couple of those places. And then that support services also does include all of our maintenance, custodial, kind of all of our operations departments as well. So it's such a broad category. I think that on the operations side, we've just got some inflation and just standard costs, aside from, you know, the things that we're doing with our kind of staffing related to counselors and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit of kind of inflated operating costs, and then also thinking about some of those really student-focused positions that we're increasing a little bit.
Just to clarify, were you talking about this decrease? This page 16, the decrease of 2.9 million from instruction, and then the increase of 4.5 million with support, that you were asking about those figures?
I guess there's page numbers. I didn't-
16.
Yeah.
16. It's page 16 on the budget.
Yeah.
My assumption would be what Dr. Cook and Director Shane said, that we do have a slight increase in both SPED and ELL staffing in this proposed budget, because both of those populations of students increased, as well as the acuity based on our ADMW numbers and our internal data and synergy. And so when we looked at the staffing ratios from them, as of right now, not very many of the models have those numbers decreasing, while instructional would decrease to some degree.
And I would just remind us that occupational therapy used to be a service provided locally, and we've moved them now into our own budget, so we've absorbed them. Also, the NEST is no longer, well, that's not true. We're still funding the NEST through the LSP. Never mind about the NEST.
I used to look at this thing all the time.
But you're providing the space, right, for the nest?
Yeah, we are
And
providing the
operations.
service at Summit High School, and so we're getting a reduced cost, but we also expanded, actually, that is true, we expanded the NEST access because of the demand and the need that we had, but that's still the cost of that's captured in the LSP agreement that we have with the ESD. Sorry, Education Service District. Local Service Plan is the LSP, so a lot of acronyms, my apologies.
So are you saying that the support services personnel budget gets built backwards based on the need?
The support services budget, from a technical perspective, SPED is built with ratios similar to how classrooms are built. And SPED numbers, and same with ELL, under Kenzie's Division in Policy and Advocacy, over the last 2 years, that's one of the major innovations we've made in the budget is they were held flat for many years. They did not get an increase, even though their students were increasing. That's one of the things that I felt like we needed to have a staffing ratio there. Both of those departments in the requested budget, due to their increase in students, saw bumps in FTE. We came back and we have now since then bumped that FTE bump down lower, but it is still recognized as a year-over-year FTE growth in both of those departments, whereas instructional not only had natural enrollment reductions, but is taking on, as I think you're getting to, they are taking on in most of the models this impact as well.
And if I could add, just for normal people that aren't budget people, the difference is like we have 1,400 students per grade level in the high schools right now, and we have 1,000 to 1,200 people in our elementary schools, much the same way support staffs are seeing higher needs. So it's not necessarily building it backwards. It's now we are budgeting to the need that's demonstrated, whereas not that long ago, prior to his arrival, we were budgeting flat across all systems, whether they were growing or not. And the way that our high schools and elementary schools are being balanced right now is based upon the needs that they demonstrate when they build those schedules at the high school, and then we start to allocate at the elementary level on the enrollment. And so much the same way now, we're tracking on those numbers in those higher need departments like special education and ELL in that same fashion.
Yeah, and that does make sense. Like, I would expect instruction to go down if the number of students goes down, like the number of students needing instructing would go down, like that does make sense. I guess I sort of thought that support services would decline in tandem, but it's sounding like maybe the need is growing in a way that is disproportionate to our shrinking enrollment.
Our special education enrollment continues to increase every single year. Our ELL enrollment increases every single year, while our overall enrollment continues to decline.
And state reimbursements that are designed to support students that, receive a higher weighting in the ADMW are not keeping up with the growth in this.
100% accurate.
And it's not even just a percentage growth. It's an actual true aggregate number of SPED students and ELL students is growing, whereas our enrollment is going down, so.
Because when you sort of look at like the total student population, the dollars we spend on these support services across our student population has grown by 50% in the last 4 years. Like it's, and some of that is because the denominator is smaller, right? Like it's just a smaller denominator. But it is like just an extraordinary amount of spending.
I'd say both the last couple of years, both SPED and ELL have remained relatively flat or increased while, other folks have had some attrition and we've had to do cuts that way.
And one of the points of attrition that is baked in that is actually kind of smoothing that line, if we were to graph that out over time, is the fact that personnel costs are going at a higher rate of growth than those decreases in enrollment. And so what you're seeing is a smoothing of that graph because those personnel cost increases are at a higher percentage. And that's fairly true over whichever one of those codes you're interested in. Personnel costs at the 9% range, averaging 7 to 9% over the last several years. That's going to smooth that line over time.
And also and I can't remember where we are in the ranking, but in our district, we have some of the longest standing teachers, right? Highest on the pay scale, longest enduring in Ben Lapine, so.
Correct, we
That's a
do.
whole other element.
Yeah, I think we have 15 point some odd years of service compared to 12 point some odd. And we were just talking about it in our office with our new budget committee member, Bryce. We did some math on that and it's actually $2 million a year increase over the average teacher rate in SSF. So it's a substantial amount and we do a really good job of
Not that I don't
recruitment and retention.
appreciate their experience.
Yes.
But it adds the completely,
Yeah,
unique-
it costs more.
Costs more, right.
Can we go back 5 minutes to Tom's comment about like the programs that are the fabric of our community? Because that's actually something that this is my first year on this committee, not my 19th plus 5th. And I really struggle to see programs in this. What I see are, objects and functions. I struggle to see programs. And I don't know, like maybe you can talk a little bit more about like how you have like come to see that in this. I mean, I just see a staffing number. I have no idea what those people do based on this document.
Trust and relationship with your executive team sitting up here. Like, it would be almost impossible to bring out through this document that level because it is people all over the place. So the only way you're gonna get to that question is through dialogue with your executive leadership that's gonna actually implement that. And so at some point, like, you can get into the weeds of this document at infinitum, and it's not useful time. The conversation from my perspective is to stay at the policy perspective, be very clear with your executive team up here about, from a policy perspective, what you want to see happen, and then trust them to figure out how to implement that within a budget document.
Yeah, so we do, I mean, we have board ends, right, that are very clear that we should be providing a strong academic foundation, passion, purpose, and this inclusion and belonging. And then again, like, it's very hard to translate those into objects and functions in here. Like, we can't, it is challenging for me to see, other than by looking at outcomes. Like, do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, until we have like system level outcomes for things like inclusion and belonging and passion, purpose, and,
I think
yeah.
I can comment on what would be some of our largest programs. Our largest programs that are now part of our fabric are school counselors, which did not exist. They are also student success clinicians. That program did not exist. Anything related to career and technical education, CTE, did not exist. And we have more programs than anywhere in the state related to CTE. That is a huge celebration for Ben Lopine. But those, until very recently, were not part of the fabric of who we are. So while we have, even from the directive of this board, a focus on passion purpose plan, that comes out through the work of our colleagues related to counseling, related to student support, related to academic coaching. Like, all of those components are new and now part of the fabric of who we are.
Well, and those are all good examples of things that were funded by SIA and HSS, yeah?
Initially, yeah.
And when we funded those, we had this conversation at this board meeting 5 years ago of, these are one-time dollars. Those one-time dollars will expire. Are we committed to that programmatically when this moment in time came? And that was the conversation of, yes, we are committed to that programmatically, and we recognize that that means that we're going to be cutting other places today.
That also means that over that time, there have been changes at the state that no longer allow those things to be, oh, that's a new program for us, those are nice to have. Like, it is a state expectation that we have a comprehensive school counseling program. That is only done by the services that are now able to be provided. So there are kind of some things that have changed along the way that are now like thou shalts in that kind of unfunded mandate category that go hand in hand with some of our, what once were interesting, new, innovative practices, now are like, if we were to just say, we don't provide any career and technical education, you're like, huh? What do you mean? So those are all things that now are truly part of the fabric, but they create a challenge when we are needing to whittle down.
The other thing that I heard Dan and Nick say at the start of this was, we don't yet know. And we will have another budget committee meeting in which we will have opportunity to continue to have this dialogue. I think from my perspective, Jen, the most productive way to get to the really important questions that you're asking is, as they do that work, produce a side document that summarizes that kind of thing. Like, what are we doing around FTE on this program, this program, this program, and this program? And then all these other things, where are you allocating that? And for me, even though I've looked at these documents many times, like, forget that. Just give me the one pager in terms of what is actually happening so we can understand it at a higher level. And I'm sure they would be happy to do that.
I would like to prematurely request that, maybe a little more than a one-pager, right? Because I would like to see, there's the balance of, yes, trust and your expertise, but also informing us enough to be able to understand, kind of going back to your comments, particularly if we haven't been on this for 18, 19 years, that the more we understand kind of the allocations, the better I think we feel in seeing what, in the times to come, right? This is not just this year, this is for years to come, so, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, I suspect that one of the reasons why the levy did not pass was because our community was not informed on how we're spending our money. And we will need to go for another levy soon. And yeah, it's important for us and for our communities to know what's going on.
Okay. I'm going to venture to move us on to materials and services. But honestly, really good and robust conversation. If it's still with us, there it is. Okay, so we've, major materials and services assumptions for fiscal year 26-27 proposed budget. Going to be liability insurance increase of 22%. I think we're going to continue to see that. So those numbers are going to keep going up. It's happening. We were just on a phone call today with Brown & Brown, and it is happening, and even with those that are self-insured. So this is pretty bad. ERP implementation, we have a one-year cost of $1.1 million. We'll probably have extended costs into the future for the ERP. Costs associated with moving out of realms, I think we put 750,000 or so in the budget. I do not know that we will actually end up needing all of that appropriation, but at the time, that was what we were looking at. And then we cut 1.8 million or 4% from the requested, the proposed budget out of materials and services. About $1 million of that was what we would consider to be our operation departments, deferred maintenance, getting rid of some softwares, some things related to safety, related to IT, and then another about 750, 800,000 mostly came out of our curriculum department and was related to, again, kind of digital curriculum softwares and things of that nature. And so that represents 25% of our total cuts. And I think, you know, as we kind of talked about before, these were the cuts that came obviously before our personnel cuts. And we really dug deep. We had Paul and Lisa and the executive TLC team all come together and look at, see, is there anything in this budget? We're way past, last year we got past the point of having any fluff, right? And so this year it's what can you cut that isn't kind of a critical material for either staff or students. I think we were able to do that fairly well.
When you mentioned cutting digital curriculum, can you just maybe on the learning side talk more about what that means?
Yeah, so several of the contracts that we have are school-based contracts, and it kind of depends on what provider we're talking about, but many of them do school-wide licensing, and we've looked at them to say, okay, how many licenses do we actually need if we move to like a student level license or a pupil or individual level license? Is this something that is used all the time? Is this something that's used for special groups? Is this something that's used in very specific areas? So we're trying to curate those that are just in a different way. Now, all of these, you know, anytime you're working in a contract, there's sort of a savviness around the contract that you need to navigate. But there are some areas where we've been able to say, okay, for who is this, you know, who are we actually using this with? Why is this crucial? Is this crucial? Is this repetitive? Is this something that we can just get rid of? So these are some of the conversations that we've engaged in.
A large majority of it was around licensing conversations, whether it should be district-wide or, as Dr. Burke said, pupil. And then, of course, some around physical materials that we have in curriculum and some around kind of personnel costs with relation to committees that are here on curriculum. And it's super important to hear those voices, but also at a point in time, it's kind of a question of what can we afford and those
Were there
things.
any cuts to any printed materials, books, etc.?
Yeah, there were. In some cases in our high schools, we, rather than just saying this is the budget, like we have a kind of a random, somewhat random number, 100,000, let's pretend, for re-ups of books that were like textbooks that need to be replaced. So we said, okay, in real life, how much is that actually used? So we just, it's not that we said, okay, now we're not gonna replace anything, but we said, what's more accurate than what we've typically kind of budgeted over time? Similarly, we also budgeted within a curriculum line is always around an adoption, and an adoption team. So if you recall, any of our adoptions have been done with people who are going to use the materials and all of that, but that all requires sub time. That all requires them to come to, you know, meetings and go through all of that. And so again, that was a place where we didn't eliminate it, but we did say, okay, can we do this in a little bit tighter of a way? And that was we were able to knock down some numbers on that. I mean, we may find that we come across a time when we're like, we need more in this area, but right now, that's an area that feels like through our adoptions, we've basically said, we've spent a lot of time focused on what we believe about whatever curricular area and a lot of time on finding the best of what we feel like is most important. And then we kind of do some haggling. I think we're moving into a landscape where it won't necessarily, it's both there's like a fiscal prudency that we'll need to take into account that maybe starts to become a higher priority than just like, we want this. We're gonna have to go there. Those are gonna become a little bit more neck and neck in the future.
I think off the top of my head, we cut over 200 some odd thousand out of the textbook line, mostly probably, would you say the work that Dean did was mostly on secondary hard copy textbooks? Yeah.
And the state now has extended the curriculum adoption time frame, so that will help a little bit, maybe?
Oh, surely. Yeah, so in theory that would, and it does help us, but it doesn't help us really fiscally. It helps us from a time management standpoint. So if you recall, we were able to push our science adoption until later. But the state also said you're going to adopt all new assessments. And so that is really what we will be engaging in terms of adoption, which also has a fiscal line item to it. So that's something that again is kind of in this same line of sort of that curation of like, it's not like we don't have assessments right now. So as we move into adopting assessments that are outlined by the state, we'll also need to have that conversation of, now, by virtue of having this, what can we let go of that we formerly had? What becomes redundant? What becomes nice to have versus must have? Those types of conversations.
Yeah, the assessment was interesting because it did actually shrink quite a bit from last year, which I thought was interesting because we're moving to a system in which we're going to give a lot more assessments. So why is that? Do we just pick a better provider or?
I don't know specifically the line item, but generally in assessment, a lot of those, what Director Tatum had mentioned was like some of our tools that are also assessment in nature, but also provide some instructional components or sort of practice components, that line whittled down. And again, this is all like proposed, right? So we haven't like landed these contracts, but this is our thought is we can become a little bit not living in, it's like more must have versus nice to have.
Was there any consideration in one-to-one iPad use in elementary school and the cost of reducing one-on-one iPads and saving money there?
We did talk about that the primary discussion of that really came to last year with our leasing. And really what we've talked mostly about is not having those go away, but having those more centrally, less student to like one-to-one student based, but more classroom based. So it wasn't a full-blown elimination conversation, but we may be very closely coming to that point in some areas.
That was one of the things that came up from the list from Paul Dean, who's obviously over IT, and there were some cuts to what we plan on leasing next year for iPads.
Dan, can you tell the people what an ERP is and why we would have $1 million on an ERP?
Lost track of that. So that's a enterprise resource system there. And wow, it's so budget heavy, and now you have me switch to ERP just like that. We do not have a system that connects between finance and HR right now. We don't have a system that really connects between our onboarding and payroll. And we haven't had that successfully for the last 3-4 years, which is why payroll remains in many places on paper. It's why we're transitioning away from our HRIS system because it lacks that connection with our ERP. And it's just absolutely fundamental and critical to operations. And it's really, we have some good people here. It's a miracle that we've been able to do it for the last 3-4 years like this. But also it's kind of the districts, well, that's really the boards, but it's internally, it's one of our largest, if not our larger operational priorities is to get that running. And so we are going out for a system that, is a single system that talks between HR and finance. Right now, we're with Plant Moran. They're our consultant, and we're probably about a month away from a recommendation, future states and some operational structure recommendations to help ensure that when we need to do the change management to go to an ERP, that we have the right people in the right places. Thank you. get a compliment from your boss.
Good answer.
I have a question. How much money is saved by moving out of realms in the first year? And then, so it seems like there's some cost associated, obviously, with the first year, but then in ongoing years, how much money is saved after the first year costs?
That's a great question. So, yeah, the first year, I think the rent associated with Realms is somewhere around 600,000. Again, off the top of my head, probably plus or minus 50,000 there. So there is no savings per se in moving out of Realms likely in the first year. Again, there's some staffing that would be probably inside of that 5.3 million reduction that we talked about. That occurs when you lose a building, especially on the classified operational side potentially in those models. But it's probably almost a wash in this first year if I had to assume. And then in future years, there would be, that savings.
I would like to volunteer that others could go get food if they're hungry.
Yeah, that's what I was saying too. I was getting ready to say the same thing. I was like, yeah, I know when I go in a minute, but go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, so just a quick reminder, the requested budget is where, department heads and level leaders, they meet with finance. In conjunction, we meet with Dr. Cook and Dr. Burke and to evaluate current year needs and expenditures and prioritize appropriations for the next fiscal year budget. We make the initial budget based on those department wants and needs, what those departments think are critical at that time. And then we evaluate if the requested budget can be balanced with sufficient reserves for the cash flow and funding for future years. Of course, in this year, it could not be maintained. It's always a difficult conversation to go back to your directors and executive directors who have already told you their bare minimum and they're critical and say, well, we need to take about 7.1 million off of this. But that is exactly what we had to do this year to be stable. And so once we moved from that requested budget, we moved into the proposed budget, and that's where we started looking at, where can we make those cuts, and that was a month-long process. And I think just so this board knows and feels comfortable, some of the question is about what is the strategy with respect to reductions? And this is kind of a new area that we haven't been in. We've had attrition cuts before, but the cuts are getting a little bit larger. And I think in future years, there will be a lot more discussion about programmatically, considering that we've been able to do attrition for the last couple of years, and this is the first year that it appears that we might not be able to do that strategy. There probably will be a lot more conversations programmatically about what is the best strategic reduction.
So as an example, in the past, we had a time in which we said 5% across the board. Every department, everything is going to get cut 5%. And it very quickly became, all became acutely aware of departments for which that created big problems in instruction. So that doesn't mean one is more important than the other, but kind of. I mean, sometimes it just the impact of cutting one is not just a, let's do that equally. So there are some considerations that we've learned along the way that we would like to not repeat if we can.
So Dan, this amount of cut will keep the reserves at about what percentage?
I believe it's 8.5%, 8.5% ending fund balance, 19.8 million. And yeah, I'll speak a little bit to that. A couple of years ago, I think our reserve balance went up about 7 million. This year it was relatively flat, maybe up by about 1 million. And then this year we are still projecting, and I've had each of my finance directors and myself look at it independently, about a $9 million reduction in working capital. And likely, if we hadn't have made any changes this year, one, that would be, it would end up underneath the 5% reserve requirement if we hadn't budgeted. But then two, in fiscal year 28, we would be effectively underwater completely, because that reduction in beginning working capital almost doubles to about 18 million. So we had to make these changes this year, and that's why it's necessary to have over that 5%. Mm-hmm.
And the 5% is a board policy.
Correct.
Driven by fiscal prudence, and it impacts bond rating.
Correct.
How much flexibility do you have in that ending fund balance without impacting bond rating?
likely very, very little. I would assume that our ending fund balance is at the threshold of our AA rating right now. Many school districts last year, we went out for the last capital issuance last year, $150 million. We retained our AA rating. Most school districts, especially large school districts, were downrated. And so their credit was downrated. So we were very proud of that. Also at that point in time, they're looking at your year before financials. They're seeing an increase of about $7 million in beginning fund balance, and maybe seeing an increase of $1 million. It will be hard to keep that credit rating, I'll be honest, with Moody's coming and potentially seeing a decrease of almost $10 million in beginning fund balance. It's the work that we're doing here that would allow that to potentially be retained.
And I would just remind this board that previous boards in the Ben Lapine schools fought very, very hard to get that 5% bottom threshold in place. And it was a slog to get there. And it's not something that I would suggest we take lightly. I think if and when the time comes that we're getting close to the 5% threshold as our actual carryover, we're going to be having probably some conversations about cash flow even. I mean, a 5% fund balance, when you think of that's if you have $1,000 to spend, that's not much money that you've got in your savings to cover a gap. We can't make 1 month's payroll with 5% fund balance.
Yeah, at this point in time, we did do an analysis about 3-4 months ago. 5% reserve requirement would not be enough, even going into the next fiscal year to cut checks for personnel in October before taxes come in November. So that's there's solutions for that. There's low interest loans, TAN, things like that. But that's really a place that our district has never had to go, and we prefer not to.
And will you remind me, I think a few meetings back, we talked about the state emergency fund. Okay, never mind.
Are you talking about like the Education Stability Fund?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, so that was, in December, we proposed to legislators that it would be wise for them to consider dipping into that to keep K-12 and, or if you wanted to argue, at least some portion of higher ed fully funded. They chose not to, which is their prerogative. They did hold K-12 harmless from cuts, and when I say that, that means cuts going into next year. All of the things we're proposing tonight assume no cuts, no additional cuts. And if you recall, the governor edicted the 2.5% cuts up to 5% for all state agencies, including potentially the state school fund. And so when we met with legislators in December, we said, you have a funding source, the Education Stability Fund. They have a rainy day fund and an Education Stability Fund. Both of those are used and have structures in which they can be allocated for support. I just want to remind you, the Education Stability Fund has a replenishable revenue source, and it is statutorily capped by legislative action. And so it is now at its cap. When the fund sources go up for the next biennium, that cap will go up along with the amount that can go in there. It's funded by lottery and cat tax, right? Excess cat tax, I think, goes in there. And like 18% of the lottery profits go into this fund. I think the reason they chose not to, this is my speculation, is that they anticipate that the next couple of biennia ahead of us are going to be more challenging. I would tend to agree that I anticipate we're going to have some good headwinds. We've mapped this, and we're going to see more of this here in just a little while. Our long-term forecast is going to show that we've got some tough times ahead of us, and we've got to do our due diligence with our legislators to advocate the level of support that I think is going to be appropriate to continue to try to chase what we're chasing with regards to meeting student outcomes.
Okay. Thank you. So the requested budget, we did need to reduce about 7.1 million or 3.4% from requested to proposed. And like we said earlier, the process there was to go back to operational leaders and say, what can you cut in terms of materials and services? and then people. And then we moved into the TLC line. What can you cut in terms of materials and services with regards to TLC? That's where some of those curricular cuts and other cuts came. And then we moved into the remainder, which was personnel. Basically from the TLC line, there was a TLC meeting with Dr. Burke and with her executive level leaders, a very great, robust conversation, kind of the start of that conversation about what are the priorities that not only this board sets forth, but that our community expects from us. And the rest of those cuts were kind of tentatively produced based on those conversations, and we're still looking at those models to see how much of that actually is needed through attrition and whatnot. But that was kind of the process from requested to proposed, and so now we're balanced. We do have an ending fund balance of $19.8 million, which I think is kind of the minimum, frankly, needed to ensure financial prudence in coming years. It's, maybe that's not the best message, but we're also right where a lot of other districts are. Eugene, Salem, Portland are cutting much more than $7.1 million. So right now, I think, we have a strategy of kind of doing a stepwise and hoping that we don't impact any one graduating class too much, and trying to do it with the least amount of harm as possible. And so this budget reflects that. This budget reflects, I think, a lot of the concerns about strategy and priorities and trying to hold harmless as much as possible classrooms while realizing we have to financially make these decisions, unfortunately, and that's just the world that Oregon education is in right now. The long-term forecast tool, this is a graph that comes out of it. It's a plug and play. It has many, many variables, and you can move it around, and these lines cross all over the place. Those bars up there are the total resources and total requirements. So resources are revenues, requirements are expenditures. That gray bar right there is the actual ending fund balance, and that yellow bar is our reserve requirement, 5% of resources. You can see in FY27, that gray bar right now is at about 19.8 million. That yellow bar is at about approximately 12.5. And you can see in FY28, as is, if we weren't going to do anything besides the cuts that we've proposed here, we would drop to a little bit underneath our 5%, which again, we'd have cash flow issues and probably Moody's credit rating issues in FY28 if we were only to do the cuts this year. So I don't think this is news to anyone in this room, but we're going to have to continue to maintain a similar level of cuts potentially. However, there's a lot of variability out there because next year is the first year of the biennium, and we really don't know what kind of SSF funding, what kind of special ed funding, or even potentially what federal funding there may be out there. So hesitant to say that this is for sure, but this is certainly the way that we're trending currently should those assumptions remain. And this is, there probably are school districts out there that are cutting 20, 30 million and really moving that gray bar well above the yellow bar. But, that's a conversation for, this executive team, Dr. Cook, the board, and kind of the impact that that has on a single graduating class or the community when you make kind of massive operational changes like that. Are there any questions on this graph or the long-term forecast?
I think one thing that is long-term for us to just consider is, which we kind of touched on it, is as that yellow bar remains at that 5%, that's going to continue to be a big challenge for us, that 5% will mean less and less as we move through. So at some point, there will be a need for us to think about getting not just above it, but how do we get above that and raise that so that we can make payroll?
Okay, so we kind of saw this on the last presentation, but there's three major financial solutions, right? You can significantly reduce expenditures. That changes the slope of the line. It does not change the slope of the line, of the expenditure line, but it does lower it. And that's what, this budget does right here that we're proposing. You can evaluate viable compensation packages. So if you reduce compensation packages, that does alter the slope of the line. It no longer increases at that same rate, but it doesn't lower it, right? Or you can do some combination of those two. You can also present a local option levy, and I think obviously that conversation is potentially back on the board, looking at the future forecast and looking at the budget. And so that would increase revenue, and it's likely that we'd have to do 2 of those 3. We continue to analyze and work towards additional financial solutions. We're very actively looking at land sales right now, increased Medicaid billing. I really do feel like we're going to bring in more revenue in Medicaid than we have in this proposed budget. Of course, grant additions, energy savings, community partnerships, contract negotiations, scheduling, and as we look at capacities and things like that, potentially consolidation in the future. And that is the presentation. Are there any questions about, this proposed budget? I've heard that Director Fisher has asked for kind of a more step-by-step analysis of, I think it's mostly FTE changes and reductions.
Yes, and kind of a snapshot, I think, of going back to Director Lynch's comments, and then, is it Bauman?
Bowman.
Tom Barman, sorry. The idea of kind of a little more thorough description in a 1 to 3 page. I can't remember how he summarized it, but Jen, do you have thoughts on that?
What I took from what he said, let me see if I can restate it and see if you say, yes, that's it, or no, that's not it.
Okay.
Is that what we've taken is this overall strategy of just trying to reduce costs in a generalized way, with still having some increases in areas where we see increased need growing. What I think Director Lynch's question was talking about, what's the strategy behind that? And what he was talking about, what Tom was talking about, was when you talk about strategy now, are you talking about as it relates to the organizational goals? Are you talking about, for example, program elimination to try to come up with 3.4% or whatever the total was in which we did that? And so what I heard was talking a little bit about how we got to this solution for the budget versus what are other strategies and other ways you could get to that solution.
The first thing you just said.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
But I do have a question, if we could go back to the slide prior. Down there under, and I hear you, that you're gonna do, more focus on land sales, grant additions. I'm curious about ideas on energy savings, and then I'm not really following scheduling and consolidation. Can you give me some examples of those?
Sure. So, yeah, energy savings, we're looking for the sustainability. I think we were doing interviews today for the sustainability coordinator, and we would hope that they would be able to do a significant data analysis of our buildings and energy consumption, and if there's places where we could, have savings there beyond turn off the lights during the weekend,
Turn off your computers, right.
Right, but it's, it's something that I don't think we've necessarily had someone in a position that long to be able to fully do that analysis, so maybe that's something they would be able to do. With respect to scheduling, I think there's different school schedules, different periods, have different costs associated with them. And I'm not an expert at that. I know Dr. coming from the education line.
Is this going back to the middle school challenges?
Correct.
Just a simple.
This is big, so I guess I just was, sorry, I didn't mean to open a can of worms.
It's not a can of worms.
I didn't really-
It's a fair question. It's
Okay.
a very fair question. Middle school schedule we run right now is one of the cheapest schedules you can run because we have teachers teaching 7 classes. We have 6, they teach 6 sections during those 7 classes. That's a maximized schedule when it comes to cost efficiency. Many, even sitting at this table, might argue that that's not beneficial to students. It's not the best experience, arguably, for students. But when you contrast that with our current high school schedule, essentially it's a modified type of block schedule that's on a rotator. That's one of our most expensive schedules. And you get, you can juxtapose those, and you can even look at how those are being manifested in real time. Things like planning period minutes for teachers to manage the work that they have to deal with in a day. And so that's just 2 really quick and easy examples of how we've chosen. You can very much say values live in your budget. That's 2 very expensive ways to think about how we value that. And if you were, for example, to say, I think we've run the numbers on this, and I'm not suggesting this, so just hear me out. We wanted to run the rotator schedule at middle school, for example, it would cost us probably somewhere along the lines of $5 to $7 million in additional staffing requirements so that we would be able to do that. Likewise, if we were to say, we're going to get rid of the rotator schedule at high school and put a 7-period day in our high schools and have teachers teach 6 of 7, we would have some cost savings. Now, I promise you, both of those statements, whatever we would choose, is going to be something we're going to have to talk with our unions about how we would deliver those services, most certainly. But those are 2 examples.
What about the difference between trimester and rotator schedule?
Trimester is also a fairly expensive schedule because you're offering, at the end of a full school year, you've offered more sections of opportunity, and so students have more choices. Choice costs money when you're talking about building a master schedule.
I think so. So Steve really highlighted the secondary impacts. What happens at the elementary level is less about schedule, but without, so the second part of your question was about consolidation. So what happens at the elementary level when we have under-enrolled schools and we continue to staff them? What ends up happening is there are not enough students to create that class ratio, and you increase the number of blends that students experience. So we have all kinds of areas where we are increasing blends because we have under-enrolled schools. When you have full schools for the number of students that they are designed for, you are able to have full classrooms. But when you have 12 in a grade level, that does not pan out. So I don't want to make the impression that blends are terrible. They aren't. There's a lot of multi-age classrooms that are excellent. That is a form of education that has a lot of pros.
Yeah.
However, that requires very specific type of planning. It requires very specific type of knowledge of trajectories, and it just creates challenge for our teachers. It's another thing for our teachers to lift and learn about. So when we consolidate to full, we minimize the impact of that. And that's meaningful from an instructional standpoint, less of a fiscal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And a lot of people at this point would say having schools less than 150 students is concerning, right? And because those are big asks of what you're talking about. I want to circle back to the energy savings. I guess when I heard that, then about community partnerships, is that something you can work with local partners like the Environmental Center who offered to help can they help do an audit? Are there other ways to kind of tap some of that expertise until, one, fund-wise, 2, until we have somebody in place? Because I think all of these, I would like to see, if they're listed up here, I would like them all to be, worked sufficiently, to feel like we're really, before we get into the other conversations of the 2 out of 3 options, that we're assured that, all of these areas are being addressed. And I hear that from most of those, and just saying.
I can speak specifically to one. I can tell you that we came to an agreement with the certified union leadership team on the increased requests that we're going to do with Medicaid billing. And so that's going to take time to build up, but I'm very confident that we've come to a suitable agreement with them that has been tentatively agreed upon, and we're moving forward with that. So each one of those has its own set of conditions, but absolutely are areas that we need to continue to poke at and prod at and look for ways to save money or create more revenue.
There it is.
Yeah, and I know this is a work in progress, and they're it's like whack-a-mole, right? But so, thank you, yeah, I just wanted to hear that.
Question on whether magnet schools increase costs, because you said choice increase costs. And Marcus and I were sitting here and we were going, well, you don't pay for transportation at magnet schools. So if you could just talk about the budget impact of having that type of choice program.
She's eating. one of the things that I would, there's several ways to look at how choice as a philosophy increase costs. We have 11 routes that currently exist in our school district, bus routes right now, that are being utilized to help provide access to choice schools or magnet schools. So when we say philosophically we believe in choice, and I'm not suggesting that we should ever stop
So
with that.
just so you know, I was referring more to like Amity Creek, West Side Village, where we're not at Highland, where we're not necessarily providing transportation, not like the tag program at Juniper or dual immersion.
Then the answer to that question is it still costs money because we're running a school with 150 students, and the overhead per student is more expensive when you don't have the economy of scale to run a school like that. That's the nature of it. There is an optimum kind of size, elementary, middle, and high, in which you're maximizing the amount of resources, but you're not running a small city. For example, a high school of 4,000 students doesn't have twice as much of an economy of scale of a high school of 2,000 students, for example.
So is it true that like those magnet elementary schools are the 150 person schools as opposed to our non-magnet elementary schools?
Well, I mean, there's more of them. There are other schools in the district that are just neighborhood schools, if you will, that are low enrollment. So if you're asking me, does a 150 student school that is also a magnet school cost more money to run than a 150 student school that is a neighborhood school? I think we would have to look at that data and be really explicit about the overcosts on that.
So go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
I think that the other layers, which is not necessarily a fiscal cost, but just like a cost to consider, is that for many of our families that have the I don't know, sort of social capital, linguistic capital, economic capital that would allow them to engage in a conversation of choice. What that means is that all of those are drawing students from their neighborhood school, right? And their neighborhood school is important because it provides access to a community immediately that doesn't require some of these transportation pieces, et cetera. And so when we provide those, we really aren't providing those ubiquitously to anybody who's interested in that. I mean, frankly, we are providing those for a group of individuals that have the ability to access that. And so, of course, we break down those barriers and want to provide this to everybody. But the fact is that people who choose this are primarily people who are able to get their kids to and from the choice school that they're most interested in. Meanwhile, their neighborhood school is decreasing in enrollment, and then we are going to engage in conversations that often involve consolidation, and it's unlikely that we would engage in that conversation around consolidation for a school that is full because it's on a wait list and it's a choice, right? So it hits a certain group of individuals, primarily those with lower economic capital than anybody else, and it hits them in a way that then when consolidation happens, requires busing, requires more time on the bus for their student, and less time in their neighborhood with their peers. So that is a cost that Ben Lapine has chosen. And about 30% of people avail themselves to this cost. So it's of value in our community, but it hits very disproportionately. And when we talk about consolidation, that's something that we will need to be really considerate of.
I want to add to that. If we use, for example, a small magnet school within a half mile of this building, for example, when they build a schedule and they allow students in, they allow students based upon the ratios that we establish. And since they only have one class per grade level, those ratios are incumbent as students go from kindergarten to first grade to second grade, and then matriculate through. It is atypical for students to join the cohort. So the only thing you have is the bleeding out of students that choose to go maybe back to their neighborhood school. And so you wind up with some class size comparisons that don't exist in a neighborhood school where we take them all. Everybody that walks through the door is going to be educated. Whereas a choice school has the luxury or the build, if you will, of holding on to what those ratios were when they entered. And so you can wind up with a pretty different look at a third grade or a fifth grade than when they came in as kindergartners.
Well, I was gonna say that's interesting because we keep our ratios smaller at kindergarten. So at our choice schools, do they have 20 in third grade when we have 35 in our?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a budget perspective, that's something we need to be aware of because that obviously is a huge equity issue as well. So.
And I think to kind of cap all this off, I'm just gonna say this the best way without being, we chose to be a board in a place that's affluent, and when a place is affluent, you have privilege, and when you have privileges, people have choice. When they have choice, they want services provided to their students because they have the means to be able to do so. Now that they do, and they're recognizing as the economy has increased, less people are moving here and people are moving out. And the people who don't have the ability to be able to have that access to do things, it's going to make it harder for them to continue to get the education they need. Now, those people who are privileged and have the means to do things are now making other choices. And at the same time, they're not recognizing the things that we were trying to do for them, they don't appreciate anymore. Now, that being said, we now have to recognize that people have been priced out of here. And we have to reduce school sizes, we have to change schools, we have to close some schools. Community partners are gonna have to start recognizing we can utilize them a little bit differently in conjunction with finding grants and other means to be able to do things. So in other words, we're gonna have to make a decision as a board and let people know that you may not like some of the things that's gonna change, but you're gonna have to live with them. Nutshell? Did I leave anything out?
Or you don't have to be a board member, maybe.
But just what I'm saying in general, but you see what I mean? You get it.
I think one of the things I would go back to is the slide that's showing is drawing your attention back to the assumptions. There are assumptions that are in our control. There are assumptions that are out of our control. And one of the things that I would say is a success for us is we did a pretty heavy advocacy campaign with school board members, school district leaders, and financial folks going to the State Department of Education, going to the fiscal office and saying, you are calculating things in a way that doesn't resonate. And we can demonstrate from our method of calculating, and they listened. And if you recall, it was a huge win for K-12. Governor Kotek said, you guys are right, we found this, we agree with you. Here's $520 million to put into the formula and legislation that says we will continue to do current service level calculations, which is that baseline, what does it cost to run a district, depending on what your enrollment is. That was a win. And I would say that we have opportunities ahead of us. I mean, of course, we're gonna talk about levy, we're gonna look for ways to reduce expenditures, we're also gonna look for ways to increase revenue. All those things are all gonna happen, or at least we're gonna discuss them. Additionally, I do not wanna discount our responsibility to advocate about why our students' needs are what they are. Because we have real impact when we do that smartly and collectively, and we can demonstrate why or how come the impact is happening disparately across the state of Oregon as we fund students' education. And our communities want that from us. This community wants us to do the best we can with our resources so that, in my opinion, every kid every year knows what to expect from their education, and we're not throwing them curveballs in the middle of it so that they have an understanding of that. And that is our commitment, I believe, through the people that are running the district, through the board that is the representation of the community, and our obligation to you, your obligation to the voters that elected you. That, for me, is the mission that we're here to talk about tonight and decide what does it look like for the next 3 to 5 years as we manage all these competing needs on our resources in a time that I think, quite frankly, this community would say is unprecedented. Even in the housing issues of 2008, districts in the state of Oregon did not have to go through the changes that we are doing right now.
We all agreed that we were not going to use the term unprecedented after the pandemic, so I'm just giving you dagger eyes right now.
We understand we got some work to do. We know it. We get it.
Are there any other questions related to today's presentation?
No, we thank you. We appreciate it.
Great. Well, follow up. We'll send out an email address for the entire budget committee so that you guys can ask specific questions. We've heard what some of the asks are as well from staff, so we'll get those to you. And that's what we'll do in between now and the May meeting, when there would be a vote to approve the proposed budget.
I just want to thank everybody. A lot of appreciation for this dialogue. I think it is very important for our community to know how engaged we all are on trying to do what's best for our students and try to manage these resources. So thank you to you all. Thank you to our budget committee members who are new, and congratulations to our new leadership team on our budget committee. We are excited to be on this journey with you all. Thank you.
Eat your food, people.
Can I ask one question?
Sure, we have not adjourned yet.
I'm just thinking about like the, right, the increase of needs for special ed and ELL and, right, and the cost per student. And where does the county come into play in terms of like I'm thinking, I know it's not like this, but I'm thinking of like academics belongs to Department of Education, and behavioral health services is definitely folded in with that. But when does it become like, okay, we're no longer focusing on as much on academics as we are on solutions for behavior and mitigating that?
Let me start. I presented at Leadership Bend today on K-12. We had Sherm Bloomer was there from Oregon State Cascades, and Greg Perea from CFCC. And we were talking about, the very first question was asked was, what about behavioral health right now? And I would tell you that while Central Oregon does have an absence of behavioral health supports, that being said, I will tell you that the partnership we have with Healthy Schools right now with Deschutes County is a model of how school districts and county can partner to provide resources where students are and where they're reliably going to show up. And I would tell you that that's one of the things that I am the most proud of being a part of during that partnership. That's a joint funded effort that both the district and the county are reaching in and pushing. Gosh, I don't know the amount, but it's like $500,000, I think, a piece, something like that. And those resources are in our schools right now, every day. And what you get from investments on something like that are the absence of issues. It's like what counselors are really effective. You don't see as many of the things that are going to be challenges for students that you would otherwise see. So they are intervention type expenditures that you don't always see that payout. Could we benefit from local beds for day treatment? Absolutely. Could we benefit from more available therapists? I mean, we as an employer are hiring social work clinicians just as quickly as we can get them into the system. We're sending our counselors who are willing to go get clinically trained rather than just TSPC licensed counselors to Oregon State Cascades because we have a good partnership with them, and they're shoving them right back at us, and we are putting them to work with a clinical background. And so that's an expansion of services that has happened, I would say, most devotedly in the last 5 years. And so it's going to be a work in progress for some time, and there are still big gaping holes, but I'm very proud of that work we've done so far. You guys want to add anything?
Yeah, I would add something. I would just say, outside of kind of the school partnership that we have with them, it's been some time since I worked in county behavioral health, but I do believe that the county still has a wraparound team for an ESA team, a youth and transition team, and I still believe they have kind of a free assessment to see if your child would qualify for kind of the acuity of one of those teams. So not to shamelessly plug the county, but why not when it comes to behavioral health, if
Have been in many meetings with Amy Snyder recently and in the past, and could not agree more. And also, I guess my concern is like when we think about mental health for students and also the need that our schools are feeling to support those students, when is it time to potentially either, if possible, dig in deeper or look for more resources in other spaces that can, hold that program together. I think especially if you are not in public health, it is often really hard to see how impactful the preventative measures are, which Amy Snyder's team has done a phenomenal job, and we're still seeing like really sobering numbers with mental health for students, and so that's just something that like maybe it's just planting a seed further down the road, and to not let that creep up on us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I will tell you, the struggle that we have when we face that conversation is, what is our true mission? And when we talk about if it's our responsibility to educate students, the very first thing you have to do is account for, are they ready? Are they able to be learners? And if they're not, what's our responsibility to do something about that? And that is the argument that we get into with funders, with state legislators, about whose responsibility is this. We're a Medicaid biller in this community, make no mistake. We have hundreds of staff that are gonna qualify to bill for Medicaid. That's profoundly different than it was in public education 20 years ago.
I would just say, I'm not sure exactly when the handoff, or if a handoff occurs with someone under 18 to the county, or what the threshold is for that, but I would imagine that we have, between FERPA and HIPAA, some barriers to just being able to be like, hey, we got a student who's really struggling.
Though we don't.
You don't? Okay.
Sure, we abide by the laws, everybody. But we engage with the county regularly. So by virtue of us having SSCs, school success clinicians, as well as school counselors in the robust way that we do now, they are engaged with county health services, other health services. It's like, it is kind of our schools, it's no surprise to anybody here, but we're sort of a one-stop shop to come in and say, like, we're here for you exactly as you come to us. And so you don't need to do anything special. You just are here, and we will wrap around you. And that does mean that our fan advocates are providing support to resources that are local. Our school success clinicians will be saying, okay, actually, we need to do some evaluation types of things, and we have concerns in these areas. Here are resources. Do you know how to access those resources? Let's sit down. I'll access the resource with you. Like, we are doing these things side by side in a way that has not occurred 5 years ago. This is a very robust program that has connections all across this community. And it's not enough for the needs that we have, and it's better than it has ever been.
And the big beautiful bill cut $30 billion out of Health and Human Services budget at the state level of Oregon.
Okay, well, great conversation. I don't want to leave it on a horrible note. I just want you guys to know, like, this team up here is dedicated to make sure that this has the least impact to our students, listening to the feedback from this group and implementing it. And we just really believe in the community and thank every single one of you, especially our volunteers that came tonight. So appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just add that if or when you have questions, you have ideas, we really are committed. We want to know those. And so that doesn't mean that I'm going to land all of your ideas, but it does mean that, the fact is we are in a situation where we are surrounded and work with some of the most committed people that could ever be in front of children. And so when we make these determinations, it's not because they aren't valuable in the spaces that they are. It's because we're in really challenging times. And so all of these decisions, whether we're shaving or reinventing or any of those pieces, are going to be very challenging, and we need thoughts at the table. So we welcome them.
Well, as a board, we want to thank you for your commitment. We appreciate it. For everyone being here, we appreciate it so much. And we know as a board, we got a vision that we want to try to create to be able to make sure we do this correctly. Because we know the community is going to back us regardless of what happens. And what we get, as long as we put the word out there, we put the right messaging out there, I know it'll happen. So I'm turning it over to my man, Apollo.
Well, amazing. Thank you, everybody, for their attention this afternoon. Our next budget committee meeting is scheduled for May 12, 2026 at 5 p.m. With that said, the meeting is adjourned.